Welcome to the Red Wagon Estate Planning and Elder Law Show, hosted by me, yours truly, Jeffrey Belomo, where we discuss all things estate planning and elder law, and, well, hey, anything else we want to talk about. On today's episode, I am really excited. I have Josh Hummer with me. Josh, how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Excellent, man. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast and have my listeners learn a little bit about what you're doing. I'll call it in the D.C. area, but you may want to specify that as we get along if I'm wrong on my geographical location. But before we get into all that, just a quick disclaimer. Just remember, please do not take what you hear from this show or any other show to constitute legal advice. If you're looking for legal advice in a particular area, please call an attorney licensed in the state that you reside in who practices in the area that you are looking for advice in. Meet with them, and then and only then should you consider that legal advice and take action pursuant to that advice. This show and any other radio show should be listened to for informational, entertainment, and educational purposes only. Now, we might touch on some legal technical stuff today, but again, it's just general information and education for your informational and educational needs. So, awesome. A reminder to all of my listeners in Pennsylvania, at Belomo & Associates, we have free weekly workshops in the areas of estate planning, Medicaid crisis planning, special needs planning, life care planning, and administration for both probate and trust administration. If you're looking for estate planning and elder law advice in Pennsylvania, specifically in South Central Pennsylvania, around York, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, we would love to assist you. You can give us a call at 717-845-5390 or check us out on the web, www.belomoassociates.com. That's B as in boy, ELLOMO. All right. Well, now that we got that out of the way, Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend.
Well, I always say I'm an attorney, and please don't hold that against me. And I've been an attorney for longer than I would like to admit, but about 20 years. And about a decade ago, I shifted into a very similar practice area to you in the D.C. area, actually probably just about 100 miles, maybe not quite that far, but close to that, south of where you guys are, so Northern Virginia. And so office in Winchester and Ashburn. And we, as I got into it, we started out with a very traditional estate planning practice, but as I got into it, I found that wasn't all that what my clients were needing. And so I've developed something we call relational estate planning. So the name of our team is Relational Estate and Elder Law. And sadly, I think our approach, it's not unique, but it's something that most attorneys are not thinking about and involved in. So it's interesting, Jeff, and I'll be curious to get your feedback on this as well, but I also feel like I am unique in that I love what I do. I love coming to work every day. I love meeting with clients. It's kind of become a personal mission for me. And so that's, I live down here in Winchester, my beautiful wife and four kids, and love being an estate planning and elder law attorney.
And how many lawyers do you think can actually say that?
Well, we've just gotten into hiring recently. And so in talking to career services and reconnecting with some of my law school classmates, I mean, honestly, it's probably less than 5%, right? I mean, 1%, you may be a little bit closer. A lot of people lie. But yeah, man, it's not too many.
No, I mean, the fact that we both love what we do, come to work every day with a smile on our face is not something that most of my friends say. I talk to them and they're dreading it. They don't even want to go to work. They don't want to go to practice. And you know, it's funny. The way that I always describe myself is I'm an entrepreneur who happens to practice law, and I love what I do. You know, and it's a cool. I like what you said there as well. So I'll bite relational law. Can you tell me what that means? I'm excited to learn.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll tell you a little story, and then I think from what I've learned about you, I think this is very similar to your practice, but. When I started out as a younger attorney, I remember I was doing a trust for this dear older lady, and as a young attorney, and this is probably shocking, but it's not shocking, but I was very arrogant, and I thought what I was doing was wonderful for her. We were saving her a lot on taxes. And Jeff, I just, as I got into the presentation of what I had done and what we were going to do, I'd met with her a couple times by the time I was actually going over the trust with her. I could tell she just wasn't with me, and I'm sure you've maybe not frequently, but I'm sure you've experienced that, right? You're talking to somebody
Sure.
and they're just not there. And so in a
Absolutely.
moment of back then rare self-awareness, I said, and we'll just call her Gloria. I said, Gloria, is there something wrong with the trust? Like, what's going on here? And she said, no, 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 everything's fine. And I said, okay, well, if everything's fine, something's clearly bothering you. And she said, well, it has nothing to do with this, and I don't think you can help. And again, arrogantly, I said, well, try me. I'm an attorney, blah, blah, blah. I can solve anything. She said, well, here's what's going on. I had a fight with my daughter-in-law, and she had two kids and one grandchild. I had a fight with my daughter-in-law, and now my son and my daughter-in-law are not letting me see my grandson. I used to see him every week, and now I haven't seen him for a month. And Jeff, I felt about that tall, right? Like I had nothing. I had nothing to say to her. I had nothing to
Yep.
offer. Um, and so I don't know how the meeting ended. I don't remember it, but I do remember thinking her problem is not financial. Her biggest concern is, and I didn't know what to call it back then, but now I would call it a relational concern, a relational issue. And so the team was much smaller back then, but we started asking again, rather arrogantly, I think, what if estate planning was focused on that and not just focused on like taxes and money? What if it tried to address some of those bigger issues? And what we found, and we're still kind of exploring this, but what we found is that aging and death actually provides a really unique opportunity to communicate and to address, not solve, because
Right.
those big issues you're not solving, but to address these larger relational issues that all of us have, right? So everybody who's listening to this, there's something that's bothering them, and maybe it's money, but most likely it's a relationship. And
Yeah.
and and what we found, and one of the neat things about estate planning, and you've probably experienced this too, is very quickly you hear what's really bugging people, right? And I just had this happen the other day. Yeah, somebody came in, the person had illustrated they wanted to give one kid, call it 40,000, one kid 30,000, one kid 20,000. I'm like, okay,
Right.
all the kids doing okay? Oh yeah, everybody's fine. It's like, all right, well they all get along. Everybody gets along great. It's like, well, why 40, 30, and 20? Why are you treating the kids differently? And it came out that, well, that one son hadn't spoken to them in a year. So
Oh,
very quickly when we have these meetings, and I'm sure you see it too, you people share with you these things as they're talking about their plans. So
yep.
that's what our practice has turned into. We still deal with the financial and the legal and all of that, but we try and do it from the perspective of a dealing with these relational issues and maybe even supporting relationships, because we all try. I mean, I didn't want fights to occur when somebody died, but
Yep.
now thinking about it, like how can we encourage folks to actually pour love and goodness into their relationship as part of this planning? And I got to tell you, man, I'll be quiet here in a second and let you get a word in, but
Ah.
it's been fantastic because it used to be, well, people get excited talking about their death and aging with us now, which never happened before, right? Like no one ever
Sure.
says I'm gonna go talk to my attorney about getting old and dying, and it's gonna be a good day. But now when people start to think through this and start to realize their opportunity to leave a legacy, their opportunity to influence those around them, they get happy and excited,
Yeah.
and that adds to that what you said, the joy that you and I feel when we get up and go to work every day.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I'd never heard of it being referred to that way, but you're right. Certainly similar in practices and approach. I just never heard of that word. How did you come up with that word? Is it because of relationships? Is that kind of what you were?
Yeah, we were just trying to come up with a way to distinguish what we did from the legal Zoom or some of the
Gotcha.
attorneys who use similar things. We're like, this isn't putting together a will and putting your spouse and kids on it is not what we're doing. And we also had to explain to folks why we were asking these things, why we'd start with, okay, so
Oh,
tell me about your kids. What's going on? How are they? And people would sometimes get a little defensive until we said, no, no, look, this is, and then it also helped us to describe the end result. And so when we're talking to a client, it's like, look, the goal isn't that your kids end up with a ton of money. That's nice, but that doesn't mean
yeah.
anything. The goal
No,
is
right.
that they live really good, fulfilling, blessed lives, right? That they have good lives. And values matter so much more when you're trying to do that than money does. In fact, money often is a problem, particularly for folks who are younger. So it helped us have a common word to talk about it. But honestly, I don't remember how we came up with it. It just there didn't seem to be another word to really just describe what we were trying to do.
Wow. So just to bring it together, like
Yeah,
holistically, when you're talking to someone on the street, let's say you run
yeah.
into me on the street in DC, and I say, "Oh, Josh, what do you do?" How do you describe that in kind of a 30-second elevator commercial?
Yeah, I say I help people. It's probably something that needs a little polishing, and you may be able to
Yeah.
do better than I do. But I say, I help people plan for aging and death in a way that benefits and helps and loves those around them. And
Oh,
so
wow.
it's the another way of putting it is like my personal mission is to create these little bombs of goodness or positivity in families that are going to go off a generation from now. And I'm happy to go into this more, but as we study this, we found that some of these basic things that people can do because of the impact of death and grieving, even something as simple as a note or a letter that you leave behind when you die, if it's gotten at that point, and you and I deal with folks who are grieving, probably it's every week, right? Like that,
Yeah.
they're willing to listen. And so if you want to impact somebody, having that as the time of communication is tremendously powerful. And there's studies that show that, right? There's
Yes.
studies that show that this results in well-being for them, well-being for their kids, and so you can impact families and generations this way. So that's another way of saying I want this to be a way of, I guess, to look at it as a fulcrum of impacting our culture, Jeff. I mean, we look around and there's a lot of bad stuff going on out there. And this is a way to push goodness and kindness and love back into families. So that's a short version of it, or maybe a
Yeah.
long. That's longer than 30 seconds.
Uh, I love it. Nobody's counting. Nobody's counting. That's awesome. So, how did you get into law at the beginning? Like, what made you think I want to be a lawyer? I want to kind of do this kind of thing. What happened?
Yeah, well, it has nothing to do with any of that. But I was a computer science major in undergrad, graduated about the time the dot-com bubble burst, and decided I didn't want to try and get a job, didn't want to sit in front of a computer all day. And now look at what we're doing here. But I decided to go to law school and thought I wanted to be a criminal attorney. Hated that. Went into civil litigation practice. Thought I'd love that. Hated that, and then eventually got so fed up with it, I went out on my own to do estate planning and business law. But once I kind of started, I really started getting attracted to this, to the estate planning side of things, and so yeah, that's my journey. It wasn't. I didn't set out to do this. I again have been blessed to kind of fall into it or be led into it depending on your faith and viewpoint.
Just out of curiosity, I say the same thing. So I'm curious what your answer would be. When you say you hated criminal or civil litigation, was it something specific about those practice areas that just didn't feel fulfilling to you, or what was it that you didn't like about it?
Yeah, a couple different things. The standard was I was getting home at night and not seeing my kids. So that's
Yeah.
that's a tough one. But then it's really tough to lose lawsuits if you care about your clients, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a really tough thing to do. And winning lawsuits isn't actually that good. I mean, it's kind of nice, but generally speaking, you never like completely win. So
No.
even if you win somewhat, the client feels like they should have gotten more. And
Hmm.
so losing stinks, winning's okay. And so I just, to be honest with you, I'm public about this. I started having mental health issues. I started having physical issues going through the litigation. And what I was seeing is the results that we were getting. Let's just take estate planning or estate administration. The best case scenario for these folks from the litigation was never as good as what
Right.
could have been happened if they had a decent plan, right? And so you
Yeah.
mentioned Medicaid crisis, right? Like, yeah, we do that too, but long-term care planning, if somebody needs to go into a home today, your outcome's almost never going to be as good as if they would have started planning 10 years ago or 5 years ago or whatever the time frame was. So I kind of made the conscious choice, like there's a need for this, and we call them firefighters, right? The people who are on the front lines, they're dealing with the emergencies. That's important. Love those people, grateful for them.
Yeah.
But our team feels like we can make a bigger difference if we get upstream. And so that was part of it too, was that kind of thought like, hey, maybe if we go upstream, that will be we'll be able to move the needle. We'll be able to kind of impact people more. So what would you
It's
say? I'm curious.
about why I didn't
Yeah.
like those other practice areas. I didn't feel fulfilled. I
Mm,
exert very similar. Even when you won, you didn't really win,
yeah.
and when you got a positive outcome for your client, it wasn't completely what they wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted 100% and they got
Right.
95% or whatever. And I'm making
150%,
them
right? Yeah.
right. And then of course they still had to pay your bill. So
Right. They're always
they didn't
mad
get
about
what they
that.
wanted. Right.
Yep.
And then they had to pay a bill and I had two scenarios where one witness kind of went rogue on me and
Mm,
didn't say basically anything that we were expected, what we expected to hear from depositions, interrogatories. I mean, just and I had to go through the whole rigmarole of trying to make her look like she was lying on the stand, but not
yeah.
not knowing exactly what the outcome was going to be. And then there was a jury trial. It was an auto accident case, and very, very, very simple. I mean, just simple. The person said, I absolutely was texting. I ran the red light and I hit the person. I mean, it was black and white, no question. And the entire trial was on damages. And it was a couple days and brought in all kinds of people and
Mm,
testimony and everything. And then the jury came back and said 0 in damages. And I was like, what? Like, I mean, there's so
yeah.
many things this person can't do anymore. That was the whole 3 days.
Right.
And I pulled the jury, and I'll never forget the foreman looked at me and he said, I lost 2 fingers in a corn combine. And you know what I got? Nothing. Tell your client to suck it up. And
Yeah.
I got back to the office and I said, that'll be the last litigation case I ever do. And the partner said, well, not if you're going to work here, And I said, well, then there we go.
Yeah.
That's the answer to that question. So
Yeah.
it was a long-winded way. I just wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. Even when you won, you didn't win. I mean, you
Right.
kind of nailed it there. It was never one of those things where I went to bed at night feeling like I did something that I could be proud of. And I
Yeah.
don't mean my litigation was fine. What I did was fine. I just wasn't proud of what we were doing and the outcome. And it didn't feel right.
Yeah. No,
You know?
yeah, I don't want to go off on that tangent, but I had a similar experience in the criminal law where I thought I was helping a witness and it turned out she was lying to me, and I don't know,
Oh,
you end up seeing the worst in people. And I don't mean to speak ill of folks who do that. There's some wonderful
no,
attorneys who do that,
we're
and
very good.
thank goodness for them. So, but that, yeah, I'm called in a different direction.
Me too. And you just said something that kind of triggered for me too of the whole Medicaid crisis stuff. This morning I had a client that we helped a family member of hers a few years ago in a crisis situation, and she was expressing how it was very stressful, it was very emotional, it was a lot of work, it was expensive, and the context in which I'm now talking to her in is pre-planning.
Yes.
And, we're talking about pre-planning for her and her family, and I have no doubt that it's stemming from what occurred previously with her family member and
Right.
not wanting to go through that. And in some of our workshops, particularly the crisis planning workshops, we always put up a slide. And the first picture is a guy like literally ripping out his hair with like this crazy face, like I'm going crazy. And then the picture to the right of him is a person in a hammock drinking a margarita. And the way that I describe pre-planning versus crisis planning is that picture.
Yeah.
And you can get a good result, but it's at a cost, it's at a stress, it's at an emotional toll, but man, pre-planning is so much more of what it is that we're trying to help for the family and, just everybody in general. It summed up for me perfectly kind of why I do what I do and why, crisis is a necessary evil. I don't think you can not be able to provide advice on it. Right. Yeah. But that's not the ideal. That's not what you're shooting for. That's not what the goal is. That's for sure.
Let me ask you this, because to one thing I've noticed, and I'm, as we were talking about before we started, I'm a little bit later to the elder law thing than you are. But one thing I've noticed as well, that's kind of something no one's talking about, and I'm going to use my word again, relational, but the relational cost to those crises too, right? Like because frequently you're dealing with like a parent-child relationship, and that's already messy. That's already filled with all sorts of like identity issues, and having someone to suddenly step in and have a parent who they viewed one way now be completely different is a very difficult emotional thing to deal with. And we see it daily. These people are it's not just hard, it's not just confusing, it's not just expensive, but it is I don't know how else to describe it. Then it's like emotionally, it's a really tough thing because of those connections, those family connections, right? Like, how could my dad, who I've looked up to my whole life, or the opposite, if there's difficulties there, this is awful. So, I mean, do you see that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, every day. And that I think just adds to the entire situation. And I don't know about the case I was talking about from earlier today, but there's another case I'm thinking about as you were talking about that, where I think it literally ruined their relationship.
Yeah.
And, I imagine, and this is going to come out completely wrong probably, but I imagine the child is okay because the child ended up with some money. Mm-hmm. But the relationship itself, it's over. I mean, they won't ever have a relationship again. And, the son probably won't complain about it because he got some money in the end. But that's not, I mean...
And what I'll tell you, a couple studies that we've come across recently, and they're not as well put together as I would like, and and I'm going to paraphrase, and this is my interpretation of them, I guess is what I'm saying here, Jeff. So back to your disclaimer at the beginning.
Yeah, right.
Those relationships, like if you go back to the goal of having a good, fulfilled life, your relationship with your parents and your relationship with your siblings are incredibly valuable, right? So if you look at what are markers of someone who is leading a healthy, fulfilled life as an adult, it can be done with bad relationships with parents and bad relationship with siblings, but those are things that tend to correlate with people not having those. So when you have that sort of damage, you get money, but then at the end of the day, he's got to wrestle. He's got to wrap his mind around what happened there, and that's a tough thing to do. But particularly, and the data's there. So, it's sad, and I think to the planning aspect, people don't think about that, right? In addition to thinking I'll just die at home, they think, somebody will figure it out. No, they won't. It'll be really tough. You're asking them to do a really difficult thing for you, and and that I think gets into, not to go off on another tangent, but that gets into this issue of why conflict is so bad when you're dealing with an estate. You're not just like it's you and I who, we are acquaintances being mad at each other, but it's somebody who you have deep emotional connections with being mad at them. The toll there is a whole lot greater. So,
the one you mentioned something earlier, and I was thinking about it, and then I kind of forgot as we were going along, but it just triggered again. We had a digital planning expert kind of come in, and she happens to be out of Pittsburgh, but I mean she goes all over the country, and she did an event for our maintenance families, and I walked in, about halfway through, and I really didn't know. I mean, I knew she was well known. I knew she was very good. I know her personally. I know her husband really well. And I happened to walk in about halfway through the event, and everybody was, she brought basically phone stands, for lack of a better phrase, and, logoed up and everything. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And they're all looking at these. And I realized it was them recording on their phones a message to their families. And then she and her company have this cloud database that they upload it to, and then at death it gets triggered and it gets sent out to the and there was not a dry eye in the house. And of course I wasn't one of them. I was crying, I was blubbering once I realized what was happening. But it is funny to listen to people in the maintenance program when you talk about what events stand out for you. That is the one that almost everybody mentions, and they say they just never thought about having an opportunity to tell their kids, like, it'll be okay. Like, look, this is all right. Don't be sad. Like, this is part of life. And it was just interesting because I don't think I would have ever thought personally to do that. It isn't something that I sit around and go, oh, yeah. But watching them go through it is like, oh, just breathtaking to watch.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because kind of the cornerstone tool that we use for this relational planning is something we call an ethical will. And your listeners may not have heard of this, but it sounds like you have. But the idea is you are intentional about leaving behind your values and beliefs, right? So you're not just leaving money, but here's what I believed and here's what I thought. And it's an old Jewish custom, and I won't go into the history. But I think with videos, it can be so much more powerful to have that. And it's interesting too, because people, when I first mention it, they kind of go, oh yeah, I don't know, that's maybe. And then I'm like, well, think about if you had this, right? Think about somebody who's gone, and if you had a video that they left to you telling you that they loved you, it was gonna be okay, they're proud of you. Like, that's just gold, man. Like, you forget, burn the money, burn the houses, give me that video. And then I think there's an aspect that's very good, or as a Christian, I would say Christ-like even, right? Like of helping your children grieve you. I mean, that's an incredibly self-sacrificial thing to do. And that's, again, one of those little goodness bombs that's going to go off at some point in the future and make their lives better. So I love that. That's awesome.
It's funny you said that. My mother passed away a few years ago, and it was unexpected, and she went to bed one night and never woke up. And I didn't have a video. I don't have a video like that. But right before her passing, I had read a book called Unique Ability. And one of the exercises in the Unique Ability book is to ask people in your life who you're closest to, what are the things about you that you do, that's kind of unique to you. What is something that comes naturally to me? And my mother emailed me the answer to that. And I will tell you, at least once a month, I read that email. And I could only imagine if I had a video, of her. But that email is kind of the same thing, where it just says what she was proud of me for and what I do naturally and what comes to me. And then, of course, she added, as only a mom could do, a nice paragraph at the end. And it's just, I could only imagine that from the context of having a video to go back to and just anchor me and remember that. And I agree with you 100%. I don't know that I ever heard it used in that term, but certainly the concept of the ethical will, I definitely understand and could see the value in all of that for sure. So, it's funny, Josh, I just looked over at the clock, and as I expected, the time was going to fly by. There was no doubt in my mind when you and I were talking earlier on about how fast this was going to go. So I can't thank you enough for being here on the Red Wagon Estate Planning and Elder Law Show. It was a very, very fun time for me, and I hope my listeners enjoyed another fellow estate planning and elder law attorney, Josh Hummer, with Relational Estate Planning and Elder Law out of the D.C. area. Northern Virginia, I guess. Also
Northern Virginia, D.C., yeah.
Perfect. So Josh, thank you. And to my listeners, thank you for being here today on the Red Wagon Estate Planning and Elder Law Show with me, Jeff Palomo, where we discuss all things estate planning and elder law. And well, hey, anything else we want to talk about. Now, today was right in the wheelhouse of estate planning and elder law with a nice, unique twist with relational estate planning and elder law. I think that's a great term. Josh, I wish you nothing but the best. To my listeners, thank you for being here with us again. And until next time, we'll see you real soon.